Greetings to my dear viewers on this video. I wish you an enjoyable watch and look forward to your thoughts in the comments. I still vividly remember the instant everything shifted. The office looked exactly as it always had, the familiar hum of computers, the faint stale scent of printer paper, the morning sunlight spilling in warm gold across my desk. But my perspective had changed because the man standing before us was no longer my boss. It was my former boss's son, who had just taken over the company. "Good morning, everyone," he said, clapping his hands as though leading a motivational workshop. "From this point forward, I am the new CEO." That announcement was followed by polite, uncertain applause. I didn't clap, not out of resentment, at least not yet, but because I already knew exactly who I was dealing with. I had worked at Hamilton Tech Solutions for 17 years. I joined the company before his father even purchased the building. I helped construct the infrastructure, wrote the code that powered the company, designed the internal systems, and personally trained every new IT specialist. I wasn't just an employee. I was the backbone of this organization. But to Jason Hamilton, I was simply another face in the crowd, an outdated symbol of a past he wanted erased. His father, Richard Hamilton, was the complete opposite. Richard was traditional, but always fair. He valued loyalty and depended on it. He wasn't a technical mastermind, but he clearly understood the importance of those who kept the company operational. When his health began to decline, he stepped aside and handed the reins to people he trusted. At least, that's how he saw it. I watched Jason stroll slowly around the office as if we should be grateful for his presence. A sharp suit, hair slicked back, jaw tight, overflowing with self-importance. He had something to prove, and unfortunately, that meant cutbacks. "Changes are coming," he said with a strained smile. "Efficiency, optimization, streamlining, the usual buzzwords. Some of you may not fit into Hamilton Tech's new vision." I felt my coworkers' glances drift toward me. They knew Jason didn't care about me, and it had nothing to do with my performance. In fact, during his internship, I had witnessed one of his disastrous coding attempts. I stopped a major crash he nearly caused. I didn't expose him then, although maybe I should have. Later that day, I received a letter in the mail. "Meeting at 4 p.m., CEO's office, Jason Hamilton." I didn't lose my composure, not yet. I gathered my files and walked confidently into his office. He didn't even look up when I opened the door. "Sit down," he said flatly. I sat. He snapped his laptop shut with a sense of satisfaction and leaned back in his chair. "Lisa, you've been here a long time." "Yes, almost 2 decades," I answered evenly. He smirked. 20 whole years doing what? Still patching old code and babysitting these systems?" I stayed quiet. I already knew how this would end. He leaned forward, his voice even more icy. "I'm not wasting a penny on a worthless employee." "Are you firing me?" I asked softly, my heart racing, though my face stayed composed. "I understand." Jason blinked as if he'd expected me to plead or argue. When I didn't, his lips curled into a smile once more. "At least you have the grace not to make a scene." I stood up carefully, pushed my chair back, and turned toward the door. "Human Resources will contact you about your severance pay," he added, almost as an afterthought. I stopped at the doorway. "According to your father's contract, severance pay is automatic, but you may want to review the terms again," I said calmly. He stared after me, confused, but I didn't wait for an answer. I left the office and the entire building behind. At home, I opened my laptop immediately. There was something Jason didn't know. When Richard appointed me chief systems architect 3 years earlier, he added a very important clause to my contract, one Jason never bothered to read, one that granted me full control over every internal system, every access point, and every security level. And if I were terminated without valid cause, I had the legal right to erase everything completely. I'm not vindictive. But Jason's actions weren't just heartless. They were utterly foolish. Because now he was about to discover just how invaluable that useless employee really was. I barely slept that night. Not out of anger, but in preparation for my next move. Every system, every line of code, every security protocol I had built over the years was under my control, and Jason had no clue what he had stepped into. When Richard promoted me to Chief Systems Architect, I had set one condition. If I assumed responsibility for all of the company's systems, I needed safeguards. Richard agreed. Together with the legal team, we crafted a clause few CEOs would dare include. If I was fired without just cause or my severance terms were violated, I could revoke all access, strip administrative privileges, and disable integrations, wipe the slate clean. This clause was buried in the emergency section, and I doubted Jason had read past the title page. The next morning, I rose, brewed coffee, and opened the remote systems control panel. All critical platforms were still linked to my account. Jason hadn't reassigned rights. HR never contacted me. No exit interview, no handover. He believed I would quietly disappear. I clicked the emergency lock tab, triggering a chain reaction. The employee portal blocked payroll access, the internal messenger locked down, and the CRM and customer databases went offline. Servers stayed on, but functionality was crippled. I didn't delete anything. It would have been illegal. But under my contract, I could suspend access until the dispute was resolved. By noon, my phone buzzed. First an unknown number, then a message from Mark, a senior IT analyst, asking if I had caused the crash. I ignored him. Finally, Jason called, panicked. "What have you done to our system?" he shouted. "I acted strictly according to the contract," I replied evenly. "I didn't delete data, I just revoked access. Huge difference." "You're out of your mind," he growled. "No, Jason, I was ready," I said calmly. "You made a decision without understanding the consequences. That's on your conscience." "How can I get everything back?" he asked quietly. "You don't need to get anything back," I said. "You're not authorized to make changes." A long pause. Then, "What do you want?" I could have demanded compensation or a public apology, but this wasn't revenge. "Admit your mistake," I said, publicly, in front of the team, the board, everyone who watched you nearly destroy a company. You weren't ready to lead. He laughed bitterly. I smiled. "You have no choice," I said, and hung up. I spent the day responding to former colleagues, some shocked, some supportive. 2 days later, chaos consumed Hamilton Tech. Salaries weren't paid, customer accounts inaccessible, support stalled, even the coffee machine malfunctioned. On the third morning, a text arrived. "Board holding emergency meeting, Jason in big trouble." No signature, but I knew it was Mark or someone from accounting, those I had earned more trust from than Jason ever could. I returned to my freelance work, my clients, and my peace of mind. But I couldn't stop following the news and the corporate whispers. It was no longer only about justice. It had become a spectacle, the collapse of a house built on arrogance. Later that day, a call came from a private number. "Miss Carter, this is Diane Hart from the Board of Directors. We need to speak with you." Her tone was calm and controlled, the voice of someone accustomed to authority. "When?" I asked. "As soon as possible, within the hour, if you're available." I joined the video call wearing a black jacket and the same hairstyle I'd worn during quarterly reports. 6 board members sat behind massive redwood desks, and at the center of the screen was a haggard Jason, collar undone, eyes red. "Lisa," Diane began, "we are aware of the disruption in our systems." "Yes," I replied calmly. "You were the architect of those systems for 6 years, and your contract grants you the right to suspend access in cases of wrongful termination," she continued. I nodded. One condition being dismissal without severance pay. Exactly. Jason looked ready to object, but stayed silent. Were you offered severance? Diane asked. No, I said. Jason told me I was useless and they wouldn't spend a penny on me. A heavy silence filled the call as several members exchanged looks. Diane turned to Jason. Is that accurate? He cleared his throat. I didn't read the contract fully. I thought it was a template. I raised an eyebrow. So, the data is intact, but access is restricted, Diane said. That's correct, I confirmed. No data loss. I followed protocol. What do you need to restore access? She asked. I paused. An official acknowledgement of wrongful termination, a letter revoking my dismissal, and a public apology from Mr. Hamilton. Jason snapped toward the camera. Are you serious? Completely, I replied. You fired me without cause, without severance, and without understanding the systems I built. Diane considered this, then nodded. We will review your terms. Thank you, Miss Hart, I said, ending the call. That evening, I walked beneath a low gray sky, streetlights glowing like halos. For 17 years, I had given that company my energy, my sleepless nights, my experience, asking for nothing beyond what I earned. Jason erased all of that with a single sentence. Now he was learning what his father had always known. Loyalty is earned, not inherited. I didn't want to destroy the company, but I wouldn't save it at my own expense. Jason never apologized. Not that day, not the next, not even when key clients began pulling out. A friend in accounting told me he'd hired an external IT firm, promising recovery within 72 hours, unaware I'd built the systems like a fortress for security, not revenge. Hamilton Tech depended on sensitive data, legal files, payroll, audits, and government contracts. Ironically, I became the breach Jason never anticipated. By the fourth day, the board was under immense pressure, suppliers threatening lawsuits, invoices stalled, government contracts at risk. That evening, the phone rang again, but this time it was Richard Hamilton. His voice was slower, but firm. I heard what happened. Hello, Mr. Hamilton, I replied softly. He explained he'd reviewed everything, including our contract. I gave you that authority because you earned it, he said, and now I see how necessary it was. Thank you, I answered quietly. It means more than you know. He asked to meet, just the two of us. The next day, we sat in a quiet cafe outside town. He looked frail, but his eyes were sharp. I trusted Jason to lead wisely, he said, stirring his tea. But his ego got in the way. You were the only one who truly protected what we built. And now, you're the only one who can save it. I stayed silent as he added, I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm asking you to help fix this, for the company and the people who still depend on it. My jaw tightened. He had called me worthless in front of everyone and fired me as if I didn't matter. If I come back, I said, I want it to mean something. He nodded. I understand. I think it's time to discuss the terms. Moments later, he slid a document toward me, an official partnership offer, not just reinstatement, but joint ownership, permanent rights to the system I had built, public recognition of my role, and full authority to transition the company to new management. Where's Jason? I asked, raising an eyebrow. We'll leave together, Richard said firmly. He doesn't know yet, but after tomorrow's board meeting, everything will be set in motion. I blinked. And who will replace him? He smiled. We'll consider candidates. That night, I carefully reviewed the documents. Everything was fair, transparent, and the contract was airtight. For the first time since leaving the building, I felt peace. The next morning, I returned to the management team, not as a fired employee or desperate contractor, but as someone whose value was finally acknowledged. Jason was in the room too, eyes downcast, shoulders slumped, silent. Diana turned to me. Lisa, will you agree to restore the system? I nodded. Yes, on one condition. The entire IT department receives fair compensation for the hours spent fixing others' mistakes, and every engineer from my former team gets promotion and permanent status. Diana nodded approvingly. Agreed. I opened the admin panel, entered a few commands, and clicked Run. The lights at Hamilton Tech flickered back on, and the rhythm of work resumed. I glanced at Jason. He didn't meet my eyes, and I didn't need him to. The system was back online, emails flowing, salaries paid, customers returning. On the surface, the storm had passed, but inside, I was exhausted. 17 years of nights, early mornings, lunches at my desk, fixing mistakes and supporting a company that never fully appreciated me. And all of it had been threatened with erasure by a single sentence. I won't spend a penny on useless employees. The pain crept quietly, not revenge, but the acknowledgement of true value long ignored. Over the next week, I handed over the systems to the new team I had helped recruit, ensuring I wasn't the single point of failure. One afternoon, I found myself in the old server room again, the hum of machines, flashing lights, cool air, everything unchanged. But this time, I wasn't there to fix anything. I was there to say goodbye. Mark, my former colleague, quietly approached. I heard Jason left today. Yes, I nodded. It's about time. He didn't even speak, I replied. He smiled faintly. We all watched what you did, and we weren't just impressed. We were proud of you. You stood up for all of us. For every underappreciated employee. For every woman told she wasn't capable. You reminded us that a title doesn't equal intelligence. You gave us back our faith, Lisa. I couldn't respond, only smiled quietly. That weekend, I visited my parents' graves, both simple, hard-working teachers who believed in strength, not ego. I sat between their headstones, hands resting on the grass. I did it, I whispered, not just for myself, but for everyone told, you're not good enough. For every employee fired and left with nothing but an empty box. For every invisible genius behind the screen whose work was stolen. I stayed there for a while, breathing, listening to the wind, letting silence wrap around me, like a blanket. The following Monday, I returned to the company one last time. Richard invited me not to work, but to an official ceremony to express their gratitude. I hesitated, then agreed. The entire staff gathered in the atrium. Speeches were made, applause filled the room, and a few tears were shed. Then Richard stepped forward and handed me a glass plaque with gold engraving for 17 years of dedication, brilliance, and unwavering integrity, Lisa Carter. The applause was long, loud, and genuine, but what moved me most was the line of employees waiting to shake my hand, young engineers, office staff, cleaners, managers, people from every department. One recent graduate held my hand a little longer than the rest. Someday I want to be just like you, she said. I smiled and replied, then be better than yourself. That evening I went home, lit a candle, brewed tea, and for the first time in years, fell asleep without setting an alarm. I knew the company would be fine, and more importantly, I knew I would be too. 2 months passed after I restored Hamilton Tech's systems. On the surface, life returned to normal. The company stabilized, operations ran smoothly, and its future was no longer fragile. Jason Hamilton, however, vanished from the tech world as quickly as he had appeared. Rumors spread, investors pulled out, clients questioned leadership, and the board whispered about failure. The golden boy who once ruled from behind a redwood desk disappeared into silence. I didn't celebrate or gloat. I didn't need to. People like Jason undo themselves. They believe power is inherited, people are replaceable, and consequences never arrive. Until they do. One afternoon, sipping coffee in my home office, I received a message. "It's been a long time. Can I call?" I hesitated, then replied. His voice was quieter, stripped of arrogance, heavy with exhaustion. He admitted he was wrong. I let the silence linger. He said he misunderstood my work, underestimated loyalty, and lost everything, even his father. I told him that was not my concern. He apologized sincerely. I accepted the apology, but not forgiveness, and ended the call, realizing how far I had come. Weeks later, I stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony of my own company, Carter Systems. No luxury, just clean desks, fast computers, and a team driven by purpose. Some were from my old team, others fresh graduates with hopeful eyes. I spoke briefly about being underestimated, about building in the shadows, about believing in your work when no one else does. I told them that value isn't defined by who notices you, but by what you create and how you act when no one is watching. The applause was quiet but sincere, and for the first time, I felt whole. Now I mentor young professionals not only to write code, but to read contracts, demand respect, and protect their worth. Hamilton Tech still exists, changed and steadier. Richard retired quietly, Dana became CEO, and she once asked me for advice. I told her to take care of her people, and they will take care of the company. As for Jason, the last I heard, he lives alone on the edge of town, his name rarely spoken. Mine, however, now appears on contracts, systems, invoices, and the door of the company I built from the ground up. Lisa Carter is not a useless employee or a forgotten name, but a creator, a survivor, and a woman who rewrote her own ending.